Good evening. Welcome to the Stockbridge Bowl Stewardship Commission meeting for March 13th, 2025. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like a motion to accept the minutes that Dawn sent out from February 13th, 2025.
So moved.
So moved. And a second?
Second, sure.
Thanks. All in favor?
All right.
Yep.
Aye. All right, they are passed. So Michael Canals is coming to give us a diversion pipe information. He should be here momentarily.
Lori is waving her hand
Yes, Laurie.
Hey, stranger.
to hear us.
Oh.
She's saying.
Can you hear us?
Mhm. Maybe it's low.
Can you hear us? Okay. Right.
Hey, Sally, how you feeling?
So,
Still alive.
Michael Canals should be here momentarily to give us an update. And Charlie and GZA will be here about quarter after. Hopefully there won't be a lag. Is there any updates or information to be shared with the group at this moment?
You talk about the watershed-based plan and whether we're gonna do anything more about it.
We can talk about.
What was the, I couldn't.
Well, I said, I, at the last meeting, I've been asked to kind of find out where things stood with the watershed-based plan.
The watershed.
Yeah, which I sent out the report, which is basically, it is kind of sitting,
Well, what would you recommend as our next step?
maybe,
We all got a copy of it.
yeah, I mean, maybe talking to the NHESP and seeing why it's been sitting there for 2 years.
I don't think they got it. I'm not.
But nobody knows, that's the problem.
Yeah,
There's no documentation anywhere.
right. So what Roxanne, when I spoke to Roxanne, who was the chair, she doesn't remember sending it.
No, she didn't send it.
She did, well, she said to me, she didn't remember. So that's all I'm just.
No, because I mean, the last document.
She thought GZA might have sent it, but I'm not sure they did either.
Unmute us.
I think there's a problem because there's been Zoom bombers, so I have to, when Michael is here, I will ask him how to do that.
Zoom bombers.
Yeah.
How do you say that?
No, they can hear us, they can't talk.
So Tom, what do you suggest?
So, well, I mean, because we know, I mean, all we know is it was sent to the select board. The select board tabled it 2 years ago. When I spoke to Michael Canellos last month, he said he had sent it to the NSEBP or NHESP.
Yeah, there you go.
For their review, but that was 2 years ago. And he never heard back from them.
Things were pretty chaotic toward the end of the.
Yeah, so I think at least somebody should try to call them and see where things stand.
That should be
Mhm.
Michael. He's the only one with
Yeah.
any standing,
Yeah,
Well,
or you could,
I could. But it would be better coming.
Mr. White.
yeah.
Why?
So just because again, if it's gonna take them, if we had to change it, it's gonna take them another 2 years to review it again.
Oh, you're back.
I'm back. How are you?
Good, how was,
Okay, we're having a meeting. This isn't a personal conversation, sorry. Yeah, at 5 o'clock. So Michael should be here and you can ask.
All right.
What was the decision?
Well, Tom asked what to do next and, it looks like Michael sent it in, so we can get maybe an update on that also.
Sent it into,
Sent it in 2 years ago.
Right,
There's no excuse for them not getting back to us.
right,
There really is none.
unless they never got it.
There's Ben.
who's that?
Looks like Ben.
GZA.
Can't tell who it is.
Ben Burpee.
And Murphy.
Oh, that's Ben Burpee.
Did you double check the console over here, Jamie?
Yes.
Huh. Okay. Yeah.
Any other
White is
updates?
attending here. Hmm.
Okay.
I mean, I said before, you know, we should, if we want them to respond, we should send in a formal application because they are required by law to respond to that.
It's Charlie.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for coming. So there's also an additional question after you give the update on the diversion pipe about the watershed plan Tom Finan had. And Sally seems to think that it was sent in 2 years ago. But I don't remember this.
Watershed?
The lake management plan,
Oh, lake management plan.
which is really the
Yeah.
watershed, it's really called a watershed based
All
plan.
right,
Yeah.
I'm referring to it as. Is it ever sent in?
So is somebody going to do something? I mean, is somebody going to check with NHESP or whoever?
So, I mean, I think after 2 years, you'd like to know what's
There's no-
taking so long.
There's no excuse for them to take that long.
Okay.
But who can do it? I'm
Sally.
happy to call it.
Sally could do it from conservation or Michael?
I mean, it's,
I can do it too. I've requested all the email correspondence from GBA as far as they have a record of all the correspondence they've had with MHP about getting the lake management plan. So they've been following up with them, trying to kick this forward and get it moving.
Well, then we should probably get a copy of whatever communication said that the thing was sent and that it was somehow acknowledged that it was received. And I think we really need to light a fire under them because I really think 2 years is just inexcusable.
Madam Chairperson,
Hmm?
I think we're going to have a problem with Charlie's presentation if we can't hear any of them.
We will once I open the security, but right now it's closed so
Gotcha. Okay.
isn't that correct because of the Zoom bombers?
Well, audio, we're not worried about. It's the video that I would shut off,
Okay,
which is on the instructions over there.
right. I followed your instructions.
So. Yeah, but you have the cameras on. Did you go in individually and turn their cameras?
No. Mm-mm.
Then cameras are enabled right now. So we've been Zoom bombed through people's use of their cameras to put inappropriate content on our meetings.
So turn them all off?
Oh, you have to go
Hey, good, right? Watch.
and you have to disable participants to start video. This won't allow them to start their video. The people, so anybody that has their video off right now cannot start their own video.
Because I did.
And then you can unmute them all if you want, or allow
Thank you.
themselves. So please press participants,
Okay, then I-
disable participants to start video, nothing about audio.
Oh.
So at the beginning of the meeting, you can have your board members come on their images and then shut off people's ability to log on. If they need to screen share,
Right. it's
Charlie,
that
then
one.
it's a security tab.
Right.
Yep.
Some people have anything better to do with their time.
No, it was an interesting meeting. That's to be zoomed on.
We had one get Zoom bombed. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
All right. So Michael, do you want to give an update?
Sure. So
Thanks.
everybody can see me. So a quick examination, and this, I've only done a quick little view of where we're at as far as diversion pipes. So there's a statute of repose, which means that there's nothing that can be done as far as contractors, engineers, or architects, because you only have 6 years after a project's completed in order to bring any claims of liability issues or anything. In my understanding, there were no construction flaws itself with the diversion pipes as far as their use. So that pretty much eliminates any attempt at going after any one of those individuals. The only individuals that seem to be available to the town would be, we'd have to challenge NHESP's legal decision legality. And we'd have to prove that they are not, that there are restrictions placed on it, that drawdowns would affect the species within the lake. Deep drawdowns couldn't be allowed. And then we would also have to challenge DEP's non-allowance of deep drawdowns for the lake. So those both seems like very high stretches in order to go after NHESP or after DEP. As far as those,
I have to say conservation agrees with them.
all right.
So we'd have
All
to
right.
sue you.
So, all right, so add one more to the list.
No, and
So,
the reasoning is
it's a-
because it's been
dead issue.
proven that when you draw down that deeply, what happens is you kill all the freshwater mussels
Mhm.
that are on the shore because they don't live in there. And we've seen significant increases in clarity in the lake as a result of those freshwater mussels being able to do what they do. So the drawdown was detrimental in that regard, for sure.
yep, so in light of that, so there's really no recourse on that. And then your final one would be to try to go to the state and basically say to the state, because of government action, that they've devalued the property and the infrastructure, and then go after compensation from the state. Any of these are huge endeavors. I don't see this as the best use of our time going forward to be pursuing an issue in the past. And this is just my initial look at it. And whether or not we would want to engage legal counsel or anybody else to explore any of these issues further, I don't think at this time there would be any need to do that. And I would not recommend that to the board, for this board to pursue this further. So that's where,
Well,
I
what
stand.
was the last thing, compensation from the state?
basically saying that because of the
Based on-
decision they made to not allow deep drawdowns, that they destroyed the value of the property. It's actually under the eminent domain section that you get to claim, or it's basically a reverse eminent claim, where you basically say, you know, we put it in now because of your regulatory action, we can no longer use it, therefore you should be reimbursing us for it. Once again, highly, yeah, we're going against the state, so. Yeah. My recommendation at this point, it's an issue, it's been started in 2007 from the records I saw, finished in 2010. You know, we're 14 years out from when the pipes were finished, and there doesn't seem to be any good path forward as far as doing anything in regards to diversion pipes. So
And,
I would not recommend spending more time on it.
and also, Michael, you'd said that the SBA had paid for it.
I believe the SBA had put up, I thought, did the SBA
Yeah.
put up? I thought it was
Yeah.
$1 million was put up by
Million
the
one, I think it
SBA.
was. But
I don't think it was just the SBA. I think it was money from the DEP grant.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it
I
was
think
grant.
there were a whole bunch of monies from different, it was, I think the town,
the
the
16 grand.
town gave us money.
Yeah.
Through CPC money or whatever. I'm not sure exactly. It was 2011, on the winter of 2011 to 2012, I think was when it was built.
We
A while
had,
back,
we had quite a bit of, what's that? 691 grant what's the number?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it was more than $1 million, the whole
Million.
project. So there was other funds from elsewhere.
yeah.
Yeah, it actually came in on the budget that they had said
Yeah,
it would come in,
right.
yeah.
And that's why we don't have anything against the contractors,
Right.
architects or engineers. It was my understanding built design and the way it was supposed to work. So there's nothing there. And that's why the only thing you're left with is challenging some authorities. So,
Right, and we have no knowledge whether it would have worked or not because we could never use it.
right.
So they would just, how do you know it doesn't work? We don't.
Yeah. And regardless if
Yeah.
you do or don't know, you have 6 years to prove
Oh,
it.
no, but I'm just saying, if they said, why are you saying it doesn't work? We don't know that it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yep.
Put it to bed.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions, Don?
Mhm.
You sure?
So can we get, an email confirmation of the.
Yes.
And do we want, Tom, do you want to contact them or Michael, do you
I'm
want?
happy to do it.
Yeah, you can do it, or I was planning on following up with them as far as in response to the emails that GZA and see what we can do about moving it forward. We will need that plan approved when we go for the final dredging, because it was something that they wanted. At this point, there's no approval process that they need to do as far as.
We haven't determined yet whether we can use Gould Meadows as being, or not Gould Meadows, but Bullard Woods as the repository for the dredging material.
Correct.
So,
You know when they're gonna do the work there?
This spring.
When?
well.
The snow and
we
ice.
have David Cameron is getting together with a representative, GCA, whose name I can't remember, to go and look at the property to finalize the delineation.
Moose or I would like to be with them when they go,
Okay.
if that's
You
possible.
have David's email? Do you have David's email?
No,
I'm gonna be submitting a letter to the SBA for permission for the archaeological study to happen. Once that's granted, we'll begin the work on, now that the snow's got leaving. Get
Good.
permission to do the archaeological study. That'll determine whether or not, based on that, we can continue forward.
go.
And then GZA also has to do some test pits to determine if there's any ledging in that area that would prevent us from putting the geotubes. And all this work, when I
There
say
is.
completed before July 1st.
Okay, good.
But you have to first find out whether you could use it as a repository.
That's part of the three.
The three
things
steps.
Going forward right now that are gonna determine, all three are gonna move forward, and if all three aren't successful, Bullard Woods is out. So that's where we're at.
Any other?
So the three things are the archaeological study, the ledge,
Mhm,
and what was the third?
the wetlands.
Whether it, they have to finish doing the delineation of the wetlands and in Bullard Woods surrounding the fields where they're considering putting the dredged material, and also to discover whether that amount of dredged material would be so much that it would alter the drainage and the wetlands and everything else in that area that would change it up so much that it couldn't be permitted.
Okay,
And they've already done the initial part of that by going to the conservation committee, and now there's the follow-up work that's happening. And the other ones were held by just the winter. And now that we're coming out of the winter, we'll get the other two moving ahead. And we should have by early summer a decision if Bullard Woods is a viable option for the dredging.
good.
Did you have a question? Oh.
No.
So is that, that's moving along per plan.
Yes,
Mhm.
at this point, nothing's jumped in the way yet, but like I said,
All right.
three of those must succeed in order for Bullard Woods to be approved as an option.
Still looking at 4 years to get it going. Is that
About
what,
3 years from this July.
3 years?
If
3 years
everything-
now, 4 years from when you
if
said,
Nothing else jumps in the way. Yeah, obviously a huge change will be if any one of those fails and Bullard Woods is out, we're
Sure.
back to considering what are our other options, and it will delay any moving forward on the project.
there won't be any more, right?
These are the three big ones. And if Bullard Woods is approved, then we're moving ahead with the hydraulic dredging that has been determined as the best option.
Nice. Okay, great. Mhm.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Hi, Charlie. Hi, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Jamie,
Um,
thank you for giving us the opportunity to come back with this. I've asked Dr. Ben Burpee to be here too, and he'll do the presentation. I'm just going to make a quick reminder of what we're here about. The Board of Health currently, if there's a cyanobacterial bloom on the Stockbridge Bowl, is directed by the DPH to issue an advisory for the whole lake. And that kind of an advisory can last for several weeks before the advisory can be lifted. I thought about this. I visited a number of lakes in Massachusetts that had cyanobacteria blooms, in New York also. And it seemed to me that at least in some cases, the cyanobacteria blooms were relatively limited in terms of their distribution over the lakes. So I thought that perhaps we could work on having the Board of Health have a protocol that would allow us to only issue an advisory for part of the lake. So for example, perhaps at the outlet, but not at the beach, or wherever. I did a lot of inquiry about this. I talked to academics and government officials in 6 states, and the last was Massachusetts. And Logan Bailey, who's the DPH official in charge of cyanobacteria bloom advisories, et cetera, is very interested in this, but nobody has had any knowledge of or experience with a protocol such as I was interested in, a partial one. So I figured we would have to do it ourselves. Logan Bailey is very interested in this, and he wants us to get back to him with it. Now, this is basically a Board of Health problem, but because the Stockbridge Bowl Stewardship Commission is the major manager of the lake and has so much knowledge and vested interest in it, I presented this to you earlier with the intention of getting your feedback, and you gave me some very good information, and I thought we had a good discussion about it. I went back from that, put together a protocol, given that to Dr. Burpee, and basically what we're here for is to simply describe to you what that protocol is in more detail. It'll cost out a little bit, but we're not asking or expecting the Stockbridge Bowl Stewardship Commission to give us any money, nor the town. What my expectation is because there seems to be quite a bit of general interest and possible application for this, that we would first look for grants, and that's what our intention is. But I would love to have the commission's endorsement about this and make it, I'd especially very pragmatically like to be sure that this is something that you think, again, when you see it in more detail as Ben presents it now, is a good idea. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. Let me share my screen here. Oh, it says sharing is not turned on.
Yeah. There, it should work.
Okay. So I'll just share my, we'll just do the screen here. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Wonderful. We'll get. Okay, great. And then I just need to minimize that. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Ben Burpee. I'm a limnologist, certified lake manager, senior technical specialist at GZA. I've been working on Stockbridge Bowl since 2020 or so with Dr. Bob Kortman. So nice to see you all again. Nice to be here. This is some of the language that I lifted from the Department of Health, the website today. And I suppose Charlie already covered this, but I suppose the only other additional details I'll point out here are that the thresholds which establish whether a advisory should be posted or not includes either a visible scum or mat. Obviously, that has to be on the surface of a water body. Total cyanobacteria cell counts, if those data are available, 70,000 cells per mil being the threshold for that. And then concentration of various cyanotoxins which include either microcystins at 8 micrograms per liter, or cylindrospermopsin at 15 micrograms per liter. So this is kind of an example of what we're talking about when we are talking about kind of localized or patchy blooms. Typically, these are wind accumulated or current accumulated high cyanobacteria density areas of the water body. And by the thresholds that we were just considering, there might very well be a need for a whole lake advisory in this lake based on kind of the current protocol. But I would argue that while this area that just so happens to be in one of our this is a boom curtain that we have installed in one of our clients' reservoirs. While I certainly wouldn't want to be swimming in that area, arguably this area over here, hopefully you can see my cursor on the screen. Arguably this area is lacking in cyanobacteria as well as in the northern part of the water body. This is kind of the southern corner of the lake. And I'll show some data to back that up here in a second. This is, by the way, this is Lake Schnipsit in northern Connecticut. We work on this lake regularly, and they have it's actually pretty similar to Stockbridge Bowl in some respects. It's a relatively deep water body, a little bit deeper than Stockbridge Bowl, but they have that kind of classic deep water cyanobacteria layer that stays. I won't say dormant because it's not actually dormant. It's actively reproducing throughout the summer, but it stays deep throughout the summer such that you don't really see it until the lake turns over, typically at the end of the season with fall turnover. Or if you have a kind of extreme storm event that occurs before lake turnover, that kind of artificially will turn the water column over, you'll get that deep layer entrained in the surface. And that's exactly what happens in Schnipsit. It's very, very prone to these kind of late fall cyanobacteria blooms, very transient and patchy bloom episodes. This is actually the same lake. So this is Schnipsit. And again, in the southern corner, slightly different location. And I'll just point out here, this is pretty bad, right? This is arguably a bigger deal than a patchy sort of wind accumulated bloom. You would think anyways, but in fact, while this kind of southern corner of the lake is experiencing these kind of horrific bloom conditions, the northern end of the water body is completely clear. And we know that because we sampled it. Cyanobacteria were not visible at all. The water column was generally clear. And cyanobacteria that came back in the cell counts were about 13,000 cells per mil, much lower than that 70,000 cells per mil threshold. And people had no problem conducting their recreational activities on the northern end of this water body while this bloom was happening at the southern end of the lake. There was no, for this episode, there was no advisory posted, and that happens very often when a bloom occurs, and an advisory will not be posted, either because I don't know, people don't bother, perhaps organization is lacking. The other thing, and especially with regards to these types of blooms, is that they are very transient. They don't last long. Even this one that looks as kind of extreme as this does was only here for 2 to 3 days, less than a week, certainly.
Is it usually that green? Because what we had was brown.
Orange.
Yeah, rust
Yep.
color.
Yep, absolutely. That's because in Stockbridge Bowl, That deep layer of cyanobacteria tends to be dominated by, there's two dominant species, or not, they're not species, sorry, they're taxa rather. One is Planktolimbia, what we used to call Limbia. It's now called Planktolimbia. The other one is Planktothrix, what used to be called Oscillatoria. Both of those cyanobacteria just so happen to have reddish pigments. They're secondary photosynthetic pigments that allow them to basically photosynthesize, utilize light at those deep areas of the lake, and the color can vary. You'll see. I have actually, yeah. Let's go on. I have some photos from Stockbridge and some data to show you. But typically, you're right. They are kind of like rosy in color, or they can be. This is another example. This was a kind of a perfect example from a recreational lake client who I didn't get their permission to share this, so I'll keep this client anonymous. But it was exactly the dynamic that we were talking about, and it happened this past summer in 2024, where this is a very pretty low productivity lake, rather oligotrophic, very clear, really beautiful lake. But they experienced some tremendous windstorms in early August. And we were sampling, we just so happened to be sampling about 2 days after the windstorms. And these windstorms turned the water column over. It circulated the lake a little bit early for the season. And, sure enough, during our sampling visit, we found elevated cyanobacteria in the upper water column. Although, mind you, this is only 3,000 cells per mil of cyanobacteria. So we're talking very low densities, but they were increased from background conditions. On the other hand, the rest of the lake was perfectly clear. There was one small northern cove where we found a cyanobacteria wind accumulated patch after that lake mixing occurred that had densities over 1 million cells per mil, 1.4 million cells per mil. Meanwhile, again, the rest of the lake was crystal clear, perfect conditions, save for that patch. Again, it lasted, I think this one lasted 2 days, and then it disappeared. So hopefully I'm kind of illustrating the need here for what we're talking about when we talk about a partial lake hab advisory. Issuing an advisory for the spot of the lake or location of the lake that is affected, while ambient water conditions or other areas of the lake remain perfectly healthy and from a public health standpoint. Just to say, this is Stockbridge data from this past year. You guys actually had a pretty good year according to the data that we collected. No real cyanobacteria issues. Of course, you have cyanobacteria dominance of your phytoplankton assemblage in the upper water column, but that's really typical. That's kind of par for the course in Stockbridge. The point is that those cyanobacteria densities aren't really high enough to be of any sort of concern, right? They're kind of remaining between this 10,000 to 12,000 cells per mil area, which is a good place to be. But just to say, meanwhile, again, this is data from 2024 Stockbridge Bowl. This is 10 meters down in your water column. In July, you're at 300,000 cells per mil of cyanobacteria. So this is kind of the reservoir of cyanobacteria that can become entrained at the surface and create those kind of transient surface layer scums that are then pushed around by the wind, by the current to certain areas of the lake. And again, we'll see that community is really dominated by Planktothrix, again, formerly Oscillatoria, which is one of those rosy colored cyanobacteria due to the red pigments. This is as close to sort of the conditions that we're talking about that I could find from our personal data records. Again, we started sampling Stockbridge Bowl with this kind of annual monitoring program in 2020. This just so happened to be the conditions in Stockbridge Bowl when I was out sampling in August of 2023, where you were having, I noticed there was what I presumed was kind of a bloom happening, um, uh, especially at the southern end of your water body. For whatever reason that day, the winds were coming out of the north, and it was pushing all of this cyanobacteria that was entrained in the surface at Stockbridge Bowl towards the town beach. So I sampled the town beach. I did a grab sample, and I also sampled just our normal kind of deep water sampling location. And I also kind of, the photo was amazing because I've never seen, from an ecological perspective, this is concerning, but for an ecologist, this is also kind of very interesting. I've never seen visible filaments of a cyanobacterium like I did that day at Stockbridge Bowl. This was just a photo that I snapped with my phone camera. Average quality phone camera, slightly zoomed in, but not even all that much. These filaments were visible to the naked eye. That's kind of an aside, but I just thought that was really cool to see. But anyways, it ended up being what we now call Planktolyngbia. Planktolyngbia in this photo, it is kind of that cyano color, but the color can vary, and it is one of these cyanobacteria that can also be kind of rosy in color, red in color. Another very common cyanobacteria in Stockbridge Bowl. But anyways, you see at the beach, concentrations they're not quite 70,000 cells per mil. So I suppose this was not a bloom condition by those standards, but it was high cell concentrations. Meanwhile, in the middle of the lake, concentrations were much lower. This little brown blob is kind of hurting my story here. It's artificially inflating these numbers. This is a Phanocapsa. This is a very benign cyanobacteria. It doesn't produce cyanotoxins. It's also one of the tiniest cyanobacteria that you can have. So when you look at the bottom graph, which is just biovolume, that little brown blob completely disappears because a Phanocapsa virtually they don't really have any biovolume to speak of. So again, most of the biovolume was Lyngbia that day. So again, that's kind of illustrating what Charlie and I are talking about here. Again, it just so happened that winds that day were really, and I looked at the historical wind data. There were two rather very windy days that coincided with that sampling event in August, which I think served to stir up the water column and train that Planktolyngbia into the upper water column. Wind gusts were around 30 miles per hour that day. So it was a pretty windy couple of days coinciding with that episode. Again, they happened to be blowing out of the north. Predominant wind directions for Stockbridge Bowl are really westerly and southwesterly. And in the kind of autumn, the southern winds can actually, or the southerly winds can actually dominate. So this means kind of a wind direction that's blowing from the southwest corner of the lake to the northeast corner, particularly in summer. And then in the fall, according to the historical data, it's more of a southerly wind direction. So just to
I have a question about wind.
Yeah.
I've been sailing on the Stockbridge Bowl since I was a teenager, which is a long time ago. And I've seen really, really strong winds and how does it not? If it's in the Labor Day is always kind of a big deal of sailing time. So everybody's out there and sometimes we have no wind and lots of times we have massive wind.
Yep.
What wind conditions can make a difference? Because we have not, at least to our knowledge or observation, had a cyanobacteria outbreak until whenever it was.
18.
years ago.
18.
Does it change?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's part of that's an aspect of something that Charlie and I have been discussing that we're perhaps folding into this project, perhaps keeping it separate. We have to figure out but it's coming up with predictive models using environmental data, predictive models of cyanobacteria episodes. So that's what you're asking is exactly along the lines of what we have to investigate. And it should be relatively easy to source those historical wind data. It will depend on how strongly the water column has stratified, thermally stratified, you know, when warm water is on top, cold water is on bottom. That setup can actually take a great amount of physical force, of kinetic energy to overcome and to mix those layers. So it's more prone to wind-driven mixing late in the summer when stratification is starting to relax a little bit, and you get a heavy wind episode. You're more likely to have a early season mixing event as opposed to peak summer where that stratification is very, very stable, very intense and strong. But coming up with those relationships of, okay, if you have a wind-driven event, you know, average wind speed is X miles per hour, wind gusts are X miles per hour. This time of year when thermal stratification is about this strong, can we predict that there will be a cyanobacteria episode, you know, the following week or so? There is a little bit of a lag sometimes. So it's anyways, I went on a tangent there, but your question is an interesting one, and it's something that we're thinking about. So just to say, you know, I put together a little cartoon here to kind of illustrate what our sampling design may be or may look like for this. We're kind of like shooting for the moon here, and we'll see what we're going to be able to do. But let's say we have, due to those southerly winds, we have a cyanobacteria accumulation on the northern shoreline here. This is kind of the sampling design that I'm proposing, which is you know, you're going to be sampling the actual cyanobacteria accumulation zone, but we also want to be sampling other areas of the lake to show or to understand what conditions are like in those areas from a public health perspective. So again, and we want to be comparing them to the affected portion of the lake. So every star here is a sampling point. So it involves sampling the accumulation itself, but it also involves sampling a kind of the periphery of that zone at kind of distance, standard distances away from that accumulation. So sampling 10 meters beyond it, 20 meters beyond the accumulation to kind of understand how localized those episodes are. Also, coupling that with sampling at areas of the lake that may pose that are highly trafficked and may pose elevated public health risks. And specifically, I'm thinking of the boat launch location, also the town beach location. And I threw in the Hawthorne Road location, which we sample during our normal annual monitoring program, just so we can get kind of all corners of the lake here, as well as finally sampling the deep site, the same site that I sample for the annual monitoring that we do on Stockbridge Bowl. So breaking down what we would be collecting, a lot of this is overlap, not all of it, but a lot of it is overlap with the annual monitoring program. So just some very basic measurements here that we would collect via Secchi disc and sensor, temperature, oxygen, pH, conductivity, turbidity, ORP, just measuring kind of like background lake conditions. For the annual monitoring program, we usually collect these very detailed vertical profiles. At these kind of locations, we would just be doing kind of dip-in samplings with the probes, just getting kind of a surface data recording at these locations. The exception would be the deep site, which I would do a vertical profile at that location just to understand what the lake conditions are at the time that this is happening. So in other words, did thermal stratification erode, and that's what caused the cyanobacteria accumulation. I'd want to take a deep vertical profile to kind of understand that. Looking at the biological analyses that we would do, we would be doing phytoplankton counting. Again, that should be very familiar. It's something that we do for the annual monitoring program. We would be doing grab counts from all of these locations. We would also be doing a 0 to 5 meter sample at the deep site, as well as a deep 10-meter sample at the deep site. Again, to kind of understand what that deep layer of cyanobacteria is doing while you're having this occur at the northern end of the lake. Well, was the source from the deep layer of cyanobacteria? Is that deep layer still there? That's kind of what we'd be getting at with that sampling. I have some kind of preliminary numbers attached here, just kind of trying to come up with a budget estimate for this. And then going on to the chemical analyses, again, most of this is familiar. We have all the nutrient analyses that we do for our annual monitoring program. The new analyses that really stand out are the microcystin and nodularin analyses and the cylindrospermopsin and anatoxin analyses. Those are the toxic or the cyanotoxins that really, again, if you remember, form the backbone of the full lake advisory. And EPA has established thresholds for these toxins. And so for, the unfortunate part is that these are relatively expensive analyses, especially compared to nutrient chemistry. But I think they really form kind of the backbone of this study. If we're going to be bringing this to state agencies, perhaps publishing it, we need to show that, hey, if there are toxins here, this might be a public health risk, this zone of the lake here, but that's, at the same time, that's not necessarily true for the town beach and the western portion of the lake and the boat launch. So we have a per site cost of kind of what this chemical suite will cost. And then, estimates for what happens when you expand up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 sites. 7, which would be kind of ideal. And I'll just also mention, I think I'm
Fine.
Yeah, okay.
I just want to question, so those costs are just for a single testing?
Yes, this is
Presumably-
this is like a per visit basis.
And it would presumably be done multiple times over the course of multiple days, or?
Well, so that's a question. So I'm gonna just skip through the rest of this. I'm kind of getting into some of the nitty gritty of the methods here. So but also I know I'm kind of pushing time, so I'll skip to the end here. Yeah, so the way that we're kind of thinking about this is that it's going to be kind of an on-call study, right? Like it's not necessarily a guarantee that a bloom like this will occur. And if a bloom does occur, it's not necessarily guaranteed that it will be localized in this fashion. It might very well be a full lake bloom. You know, there's a couple things that need to fall into place here for this to happen. And yeah, you know, other challenges, you know, will involve kind of like rapid response time for field samplings. There'll have to be some sort of surveillance on the lake such that these things are captured and then communicated back to GZA so we can get there. Yeah, and depending, you know, if say this happens once a summer, is that going to be enough data to publish on or to hang a hat on for policy changes, or will this require perhaps multiple seasons, or will we get lucky and have 5 of these episodes occur in 2025? That's not necessarily lucky, but you know,
That's not lucky.
I mean, yeah. And then, but also, you know, we can make it much more budget friendly if we kind of look at some volunteer monitoring without GZA. And you know, if so, who are those volunteers? It's just a matter of identifying them. But again, like we're going to be seeking out funding sources for this, and Charlie and I were discussing today. There's a couple options that we're already kind of thinking about. I know, you know, I'll speak for GZA that we have a whole department full of talented people who are their sole purpose is to look for kind of state and federal as well as more local sources of funding for clients that have projects like this. So, you know, we'll see what happens, but I'll leave it open for questions and discussion.
I have a question for you. I understand, I think it's great, the isolation of isolating where it is versus the rest of the lake being healthy for our recreational use. But all the testing, help me understand, what's the advantage of the testing of sort of like letting us know that there's potential, but once it comes in, there's nothing we can do about it. In other words, whether we know it's coming or don't know it's coming, I'm not sure what the advantage of all the testing is. Help me out there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm being clear, but
yeah, you're just wondering like what is the purpose of, you know, this is some pretty hefty prices on these analyses.
Right.
Like what is the purpose of conducting these, especially so many of them?
And the winds.
Can I jump in here? Can I just jump in for a minute here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because I don't want to put Ben on the spot here. In the first place, what we're talking about is a project that would, first of all, there is nothing that's going to change insofar as the advisory is concerned. The current state regulations, or not regulations, but the recommendations say that the Board of Health, for example, in that small area bloom that Ben hypothesized just a little while ago, that would have triggered an entire lake advisory. So the entire lake would have been shut down, number one. The purpose of doing these various tests is to set the documentation in place. Let's assume just for unfortunate circumstances, we have a couple of blooms, okay? The documentation of the by looking at these various chemical tests would show that during the whole lake advisory, that if we had had a partial lake advisory only in the north, in that area, that these other areas would not have had any of these other changes that we would have thought would be bad. And if we can do this a statistically valid number of times, then we don't have to do it anymore. Instead, what we've got is data to give to the state, to Logan Bailey in particular, and the DPH to say that we think we have a basis for not closing a whole lake down. Now, so this is the purpose of a lot of these tests is simply to set the stage for the presentation to the DPH that the total lake advisory is not indicated. And we don't have to do that anymore. Right now, we don't have the statistical data to prove that. We don't, and we cannot, and I think this was a point that was brought up by the commission when I first went, and I agree with it completely. We can't just go and have a local advisory because we think that's going to work or something. We need to know that it's safe. And what these tests will do and again, we need to have a statistically valid set of data. You can't just, I don't think, do this once and generalize. So it would have to be done on several occasions. Now, my prediction is that we're not going to have any more cyanobacteria blooms, and we're never going to have to do this. And I'm going to knock on wood here, but and that they'll be doing this in some other lakes, and we'll be profiting from that as they go to do it. But right now, we're working on it from the Stockbridge Bowl point of view. We're presenting it to the commission as though this is a Stockbridge Bowl situation, because I think Ben has made it clear that it could be. And it's certainly, we have the stuff in the lake that could do this, and we know that it happened a couple of years ago. But for the time being, what I would say is that this is something that would be a hypothetical set of data that Ben and I are going to still work on. It's mostly the principle of this stuff that you should understand. So I can't see the screen well. I have this other thing. So I'm not sure who answered that question, who asked that question, but it was a good one.
Yeah, Charlie, are these tests being done when there's a bloom or just every year? Oh, just when there's a bloom. You're saying these tests would be
so some of the tests that Ben is proposing are the ones that I'm speaking of. Now, Ben, you explain now the value of the ones that you might anticipate doing before a bloom.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. But so that portion of this project really hinges on the data set that we've been building all along at Stockbridge Bowl with the annual monitoring program, where we're, for the most part, regularly monitoring the lake and collecting chemistry, physical water column measurements, as well as phytoplankton count samples that include cyanobacteria. We've been doing that again since 2020. So that portion of the project where I'm kind of interested in coming up with some potentially predictive models to understand, okay, when do these things show up in Stockbridge Bowl, and can we even tell necessarily, or can we tell potentially where they're going to show up in Stockbridge Bowl? That portion of this project is going to lean pretty heavily on that data that we've been collecting all along, which is kind of nice, right? It's putting that really valuable, high quality data set to good use. Now, other data will be required, and I'm thinking of environmental factors that have an influence of on cyanobacteria density, bloom conditions. So wind is a big one. So coupling that data set with historical climactic data, is part of the project here.
Can I-
Oh, I think Patrick, did you still have a question?
Could-
Ben and Charlie, can you hear me?
I can.
Here's my question. What a great idea this is first. Thank you. I'm wondering if this isn't a better, and this may be an apples to oranges suggestion, and I'm not a scientist, so if it is, tell me. But I'm wondering if this would be better of a regional project. You know, you look at some of the lakes in central county, like Pontusic or Nona. You look at Richmond Pond, you look at Laurel Lake, you look at Lake Bueller, Mansfield. Why limit this to whether or not there's a bloom this summer on Stockbridge Bowl rather than a regional rapid response where we try to get the next 5 blooms that occur in any of these lakes and do a grant request and say, we're going to do 5 of these and try to set up conditions similar to this based on 5 target lakes. And frankly, some of those lakes have a higher prevalence of blooms than Stockbridge Bowl has had, so you could get the data faster. So many of our, not only is this good for science, but frankly, all of these towns and what Berkshire County has in common is that these lake districts have a tremendous impact on our tax base, and keeping these lakes healthy is in all of our town's interest, not just Stockbridge's. And thinking about how you might structure a regional grant might make it actually easier to fund, even though it would be a little bit more expensive. So I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a good idea, Patrick. Actually, we've been thinking about that. To confess, some of the data that Ben is talking about is probably of more intellectual interest, and with the intention of putting together a scientific study that would be disseminated. It would be a limnological study. I'm sure Ben would be the one in charge of that, and it would then give more information. And part of the reason that I'm optimistic about getting a grant is that I've been told from the number of people that I've spoken to about this, that this will have wider application. Now, your point, I think, is a very pragmatic point that I didn't really crystallize on, and I thank you very much for it. And that is the idea of talking to some of the other lakes as we go to look for the grant sources, if we find we have some trouble with it, or maybe even as part of it. Ben, what do you think about that?
I think it's a wonderful idea. I mean, since its inception, I've been thinking of Stockbridge as kind of the jumping off point for this study, but I think it has very wide applicability, honestly, throughout New England. I work in Connecticut. The examples that I showed up front are Connecticut based. So I'm certainly thinking about this beyond just Stockbridge Bowl. But yeah, so I think that's a very good idea. Yeah.
Just even expanding it to Pittsfield, all of a sudden you're talking about environmental justice communities, and you might have a much more significant chance of getting a grant. So even just partnering on Nodota and Pontusic and Stockbridge Bowl might make the grant landscape much easier to approach.
I would think.
Thank you. And then Don had a question.
I just, could I get copies for the minutes? Can I get copies of your slides, please? Afterwards?
Yes, I emailed them in PDF format to Jamie and Charlie.
Okay, excellent.
I got those late this afternoon, so I can send them.
You'll
Kevin.
forward them. And also, so am I understanding correctly that this is not being done in other lakes, though other lakes would benefit from it as well?
But it would have to be done in another lake, right?
What's that?
It doesn't have to be done in other lakes. If you want to have the data in your lifetime, you can't just do it on one lake, right?
Well, that's my question. So this is not being done in other lakes at the current time, is that, but there is a plan for it to be, since the other lakes would benefit from it probably better than we would.
Yes, I think that's correct, Don. I think really, I don't want to waste your time by making you think about things that will involve other lakes, probably. The basic idea here is that that I value the endorsement of the commission to move forward with this and basically seek a broader funding option, and with the idea of potentially coming back to the Stockbridge Bowl with the thing already in place, having been done elsewhere, and not having to be too concerned about it here. Although Ben, I think, will agree with me that all lakes have their own personalities, and the kind of preliminary testing that we're talking about here to establish the reliability of this kind of an approach would probably be necessary for the Stockbridge Bowl anyway, just because each lake is so different. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, again, some reservoirs and lakes are more susceptible to this dynamic than others. And it really depends on lake depth and thermal dynamics. And if you get that kind of established layer of deep growing cyanobacteria throughout the summer, that can then become disturbed at any point in the season or at the end of the season. That really causes these kind of patchy, flashy dynamics at the surface. That's not going to be all lakes, but in lakes where it does happen, it seems to be, I won't say an annual occurrence, but just working at ECS with Bob since 2020, I've noticed it happen multiple times in some lakes and reservoirs versus others where it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the bowl never will have to do this, but if you can understand, a couple of years ago, we had that cyanobacteria bloom. The state told us the Board of Health was not familiar with these because we never had one. And so I didn't really understand much about it. So I determined not to be vulnerable, not to leave the town vulnerable if I could do that. And as a result of trying to figure these things out, this is my response to that sense of vulnerability that I thought the town might have before. But I think at this stage, the commission doesn't really have to be concerned about taking any specific action or doing anything else. But I will keep in contact with you should we eventually need, if this goes forward, eventually we're going to need that kind of cooperative effort that Ben was speaking of to make things more practical and cheap. And we'd have to look at this. So we would get back to you. But for now, what I would like to just get a feeling from the commission about is, do you think that this is something that if we could have had it, if we do have it in place, or we eventually get to that level, would the commission think this would be a benefit to the bowl to have that kind of an option? We don't have to do this. We can just have a standard whole lake advisory if there's a bloom, and we don't have to go through with any of this stuff. My impression was that it was a hardship for the lake.
So-
Charlie, I think Sally had a question.
Actually, I had
Go
two
ahead,
questions.
Sally.
I had
Then
two
you-
questions. One, I understood that our sewer and water folks were
Mhm.
doing testing on the lake.
Right.
Regularly. And I'm not sure how we marry that with what GZA is doing. And my other question was, Charlie, a couple of years ago, when we had the other board, you had posited that that you had seen some evidence, nothing concrete, but some evidence that lakes that had used herbicides were more susceptible to cyanobacteria outbreaks. And certainly the Pontusic and Anota have been known to do that, and they are also known to have more outbreaks than we do. Has anything come to your radar on that?
Well, I did do a study myself. I got all of the data from various agencies in the state, and I found a 4.5-fold increased incidence of cyanobacteria blooms in lakes that had herbicide application the year before compared to lakes that didn't. But that's a whole other story. Insofar as the marrying of the data that are being gathered currently with this particular project, I think this particular project will benefit a lot from that ongoing data collection. But the data collection that's going on now, that has been going on, is not just for cyanobacteria. This is a limnological method of understanding the health, general health of the lake, and it extends to all sorts of other kinds of things that happen in lakes. And I know the Concom knows about that, and of course, you know, Ben has that. So if you want to add more about that marrying idea, I think right now the bottom line is that at this stage the lake seems to be pretty healthy. That's what I think. I mean, what do you think, Ben?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's, you know, the volunteers, and in particular, I'm thinking of Mike Buffoni, who's done a terrific job with the kind of annual monitoring program. You know, they you'll notice when I talked about volunteers, I didn't name kind of any folks outright. That's very much to be determined. And it very well may be more of a this project in particular may be very well more of a kind of like a citizen science approach, rather than using kind of like town personnel. It's going to be separate from the annual monitoring program. Although, yes, certain aspects of the project, particularly when it comes to coming up with some sort of background knowledge or statistical models that where we can kind of get at prediction of these things, that will be relying on data that you've really collected since 2020 that we would love to use with your permission, and be putting it to good use for the benefit of the lake and the community around it.
Sally, did you have any
No, that
others?
was it.
Oh, okay. Wait, and then,
Go ahead, Tom.
So I mean, I think this is a really good idea.
Yes.
I think just from a practical perspective, I don't know what your statistical analysis is, how many, data points, how many episodes of a bloom you need to have statistically valid data. But I would imagine it's going to be 20 or 30 or 40, which is not going to happen in the next 200 years in Stockbridge Bowl. So it's just going to have to be a regional or a statewide project that you're planning.
It only happened once.
Yeah, as we said, I think we anticipate that. And my purpose for bringing it before the Stockbridge Bowl Stewardship Commission is not to anticipate doing this study on the Stockbridge Bowl necessarily. In fact, I would hope we would not do it. But I would hope that this study would be relevant to the bowl eventually, potentially, and having having the commission's endorsement of that concept is what I'm really asking for. I just want to know that. I mean, at this stage, if the commission doesn't think this is appropriate for the bowl, we don't have to continue the discussion. As I said, we'll just do whole lake advisories, and that'll be the end of it. But eventually, I'm hoping that if Logan Bailey of the DPH can sign in on this, that we'll have a statewide protocol for this that will have come from this idea. And then it will come back to the Stockbridge Bowl, and we'll see what we want to do about it at that point. But I think really here, it's just it's very important to have the people who are concerned about something like the lake, I think, be privy to the efforts of people doing other things, so that we just don't do things that you don't want us to do. You know what I mean? And plus, I think you guys have very interesting points of view and have contributed to this. So understanding that I don't expect to get any kind of statistically, and I hope we don't have the opportunity to have a statistically valid set of samples from the Stockbridge Bowl to do this, that the next time we revisit this, I'll simply tell you that we passed it on and it's being done, and that hopefully we'll never need it.
Right, Don had a question?
Well,
Comment?
yeah, I just, so following what Charlie said, and he's looking for an endorsement from us, I think, that he's proposing that I think we believe that the idea of a partial identification versus the entire lake being subjected to a controlled sequence of cyanobacteria bloom would be beneficial. And therefore, I would suggest that we endorse in principle, because he's not asking for anything particular, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, that we endorse in principle the idea of what they're doing and look forward to seeing future results.
Leads to a poll of the members.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
let me
think
make a
we could-
motion.
Yeah,
I move that we endorse in principle this partial examination, what do you call it, a partial cyanobacteria?
We call it a partial HAB advisory.
A partial, that's right. I make a motion that we endorse the idea that we keep looking into a partial advisory, and that this would be really beneficial for the lake, and encourage them to
And Sally
continue with their
second.
work.
all in favor?
Aye.
Charlie, I have a question for you.
Well, there's a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
There was a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now,
Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, Charlie, the cyanobacteria
Turn this-
issue is a Board of Health issue.
and I sent
From
you
what I
the slides
understand-
already.
Yes, if there's a
Oh.
cyanobacteria bloom, it's the Board of Health that issues the advisory.
Right, so
Would you send it?
having that stated, I'm wondering, are you asking us just as a general what we feel about it? Or even if we didn't agree, I mean, this is something that the Board of Health would be doing regardless or not doing, that you have the authority to do, just from a safety point of view for the rest of for the town as a job.
Yeah, well, look at it from the other point of view. Let's say that I never told you anything at all about this.
Yeah,
And I just went along and did it, got this in place, and then suddenly the Board of Health only issues an advisory for part of the lake, and we're doing all of this testing and
Partial
stuff to
advisory.
figure out what part we should do and everything like that. I think that you guys would be in a position to be upset that you
Right.
hadn't been properly advised or had been able to weigh in on it. And so
Okay.
what I've been trying to do here is to do a diligent effort, make a diligent effort to bring you to have a proper input. That's
right, no,
what I'm looking at.
I appreciate, I mean, we all appreciate that. That's really, thank you, really, we appreciate that.
Mhm.
Thank you, and I value your input just as much as I value your endorsement, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
The second part, as a businessman, basically, is there's a lot of work for you. I mean, this is a long-term project for
Yes, but you
one
know,
of the rewards versus the reward.
When we had that first bloom, I didn't know anything at all about cyanobacteria. It was, and here I was on the Board of Health, and none of us knew anything about it. And we never had one. So yes, it was a great deal of work, and but at the same time, I think that one of the important things about the town is that we each look we're watching each other's backs, and there are certain places where some people have a responsibility. When you're in a government, you have to do the right thing for your town. And, I think that here, it's important to understand vulnerabilities for the lake. And I think that this vulnerability is hopefully a very low one. Hopefully we're never going to have another cyanobacteria bloom. Hopefully all of this stuff will have been a moot issue. But It may not be. I don't know what to say. And I don't want to jinx us or anything like that, but this is an important thing to put in place, I believe, and I'm glad you agree with me that it's worthwhile to look at it and make an effort to see how we would implement it potentially in the bowl. So once again, I thank you for that.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Ben. Any other comments, questions? Thank you so much. And data is
You're welcome.
always important. And so our next meeting is April 10th at 5 p.m. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And second?
Start you every 2 weeks in April.
Yes,
Or twice a month, I should say.
yeah. All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you. Have a good week.